In this example, we're going to add navigation to our Colors app. When a color is selected, we want to transition to another view controller and display that color in the view controller. So we need a method of navigation that's going to involve the use of a navigation controller. We need a way to transition when the user taps in a cell that involves creating a segue. And then we need a mechanism to pass data to the destination view controller. When the user taps a cell, we're going to go to another view controller, and that view controller needs the information of what color the user selected. So we have the previous version of the project. This is the one where we're displaying a table view with a set of cells that contain the name of the color as well as has the background color of the cell set to the color. I'm going to begin by selecting the view controller that contains the table view and going up to Editor and say Embed in Navigation Controller. I'm going to drag this a little bigger and readjust things so we can see them a little nicer. So what we have is a navigation controller, which is now our initial view controller, and the navigation controller has the colors view controller as its root view controller. This, let's open up the inspector, is a relationship segue that creates a relationship between the navigation controller and this colors view controller. This relationship segue establishes this view controller as the root view controller for the navigation. Think of it as the home. It is the starting point. It's the place that we always come back to. I can delete this segue by clicking on it. Notice it's highlighted here, and then clicking the delete key. And if I wanted to reestablish that relationship, I could control-click drag from the navigation controller to the colors view controller, and in the pop-up we can choose relationship segue root view controller, and I'm back to where I started. Now you'll also notice that when I did this, this gray area appears at the top. This area serves as the place where the nav bar is going to be. Our table view was placed below the top layout guide, and the nav bar is going to appear in the top layout section, so it's going to be where the top layout guide is, and then the rest of my UI, the table view, is going to be below that top layout guide. Now you'll also notice I ended up with some extra white space here in the table view, and this is because when I use a view controller and I put a table view in it and then I embed this in a navigation controller, some space is made for the navigation bar, but since we placed the table view below the top layout guide where the nav bar goes, we don't need this extra white space. So if we have that extra space, we can uncheck here a box that is going to indicate to us that we have scrolling enabled. So I'm going to select the view controller here, and where it says here adjust scroll view insets. Now if I click that, boom, this pops up. So I don't want adjust scroll view insets checked if I'm placing my view controller inside of a navigation controller stack, and I don't need that additional space for the nav bar because I place my UI below this top layout guide. So again, if you have this extra white space, you're going to select the view controller and then uncheck adjust scroll view insets. So when the application starts, the navigation controller instance is created, and then it creates an instance of its root view controller, which ends up being this view controller that contains the table view. And if I run this after doing that step, so I'm going to stop the simulator and then restart it. You'll see that we have our colors and there's this additional space at the top. And what we want to be able to do is when we click on a color, we want to navigate to another view controller and then display information about that color in that view controller. So let's figure out if we can get a title up here. And there's a couple of ways of getting the title to display up here in the nav bar. One of these ways is to double click in the space where the nav bar is, and it's going to display this navigation item in which we can set the title. We can either type it here or we can type it up where it says title, and we could say colors. So colors appears there. The other way I could do this is I'm going to delete colors from there. I'm going to the colors view controller, and up in the view did load, I'm going to put self.title equals colors. And if I run this, the title that I set in the root view controller is then going to become the title that appears in the navigation item up in the nav bar. So we've now titled this view controller. And I'm wanting to do the same thing when I navigate to the destination view controller. I would like to place a title up here, which is the color that was selected. And we'll see how to do that in a moment. So self.title to set the colors, or again, we could double click, zoom back in here again, could double click up here and type the colors there, or type it here. So the next thing is I want to be able to select an item and then navigate to another view controller. So I'm going to go to the library and search for a view controller, and I'm going to drag the view controller out next to the view controller that contains the table view. This view controller currently does not have a custom class, and so I want to create one. I need the code associated with this view controller where I can program it to do what I want. So I'm going here to the colors folder, holding the control key down, clicking and saying new file, and I'm going to create an iOS Cocoa Touch class. That's a UI view controller, and I'm going to call it color detail view controller. Hit next and save it. Here is the color detail view controller. I'm going to go to the storyboard and set that as the custom class on the view controller. So it's going to be color detail view controller. So when the user taps on this color cell, we want to have them go to the color detail view controller. And we're going to do that by creating a segue. And we create a segue by control click dragging from the cell to the view controller that we want to go to and specifying the segue. Well, we could do it from here and select show, and this creates a segue that goes, let me make this a little wider, from the color detail view controller from the cell. Notice how the cell is highlighted in blue when that is selected, and it's segueing to the color detail view controller. Another way that I could do this, I'm going to select that segue and delete it, is to come over here to the cell and select it, and then hold the control key down and click drag from here to the color detail view controller. And we're going to say selection segue show. And so again, we have a show segue so that when this cell is tapped, we're going to segue to this color detail view controller. So in the color detail view controller, when an instance is created and we segue to it, we need to know which color was selected. So Remember, our colors at this point are instances of structs that contain the name of the color and a UI color. We would like to receive a copy of the instance of that struct and keep it here in the color detail view controller and then use it. So I'm going to create a variable called color, and it's going to be of type color. That's the struct type that we created. And it's going to be an optional because at the beginning, before we set it, it's not going to have a value, so it needs to be able to be set to nil. And then once we have a color that we pass along, we're going to set it. So it fits the requirements of something that needs to be an optional. And when we receive this color, we're going to want to do something with it. And so we need to decide what to do with it. So I'm going to go to the color detail view controller on the storyboard. And I'm just going to create a label that is in the middle of the storyboard. And I'm going to take this label and set an auto layout constraint so that it's centered horizontally and vertically. So I control click drag diagonally from the label, got the pop-up, held the shift key down to select the first one, that is, say, select center horizontally, and then I can leave off the shift key, select the second one, center vertically, and then say add constraint. So my label is set there in the middle of the display. The label is something we're going to need to set the text on the label, so we want to display the color in it. So I need an IV outlet. So with the view controller selected, I'm going to the assistant editor. It's going to display the color detail view controller next to it in Interface Builder, and I'm going to select the label, and I'm going to control click drag into the class outside of the functions. It could be above or below this var color. I'm going to do it below. And I'm going to create an outlet to the label, and I'm going to say color name label and click connect. Now once I have an instance of the view controller and a color has been set on it, in the view did load, I would like to use the color to set the color in the color name label. So below super view did load, I'm going to put color name label dot text equal, and then we're going to have a particular color, and that color is going to have a name. Now we get an error because color is an optional. And so we could say here, I'm going to go leave the assistant editor, that we don't go to color.name, but color?name. So why can we do this, and how does this work? First off, color?name means that since color is an optional, by putting question mark here, we're saying, well, if the color is nil, then we can't unwrap it and we can't call .name on it. If it is not nil, then we can unwrap it and we're going to call .name on it. So in one case, if color is nil, then there is going to be no name returned and set on text. And if there is a color, then we are going to call .name on it, and we're going to set that as the text in the label. So the only way that this will work is if the text here is also an optional, and look at this, it is a string optional. So should color?name not set a name, that's fine. It'll be set to nil, and the text in the label will also be nil, which means the label won't display any text. And if the color exists and we get a name, therefore we have a string, we're able to set it as the text on the label. So this is this ability is a result of optional chaining, being able to use this line of code, knowing that the result could be a nil or could be a string, and that's allowed because the text property on the label is also an optional, so it's able to receive a nil or it's able to receive a string. So if we ran this now, we have our list of colors. It says colors at the top. If we click on a color, we segue to this other screen where we have the label. We have not told this destination view controller, this place we've transitioned to, what color was selected, so we need to do that yet. But we automatically, on the navigation bar, get a back button item, which is the name of the view controller we're going back to. So no matter what I select, I end up here in the color detail view controller, and then I can segue back to the colors view controller where we have the table view with the colors. So the thing we're missing to complete this is the ability to tell the destination view controller which color was selected. Here in our colors view controller at the bottom, it says, in a storyboard-based application, you often want to do a little preparation before navigation, and then it's prepare for segue, sender, blah, blah. So what we need to do is implement this prepare function. We will receive the segue object, and we're going to use it to get the destination view controller and tell it the color that was selected, and then it will have the color it needs. I'm going to delete this because I can just type PREP, prepare, and the second one down is for segue. So this is a function that's going to get called when a segue occurs. So we have a table view cell that has a segue to the detail view controller. When the user taps on that cell, that segue is going to occur. So we now need to use that segue to figure out which view controller we're going to. So I'm going to put here, let destination equal segue dot destination. Now the place that we're going to is not just a generic UI view controller. In fact, if I hold the Option key down and click on this, you'll see that the destination on the segue is of type UI view controller. And all UI view controllers inherit from UI view controller, so they're all UI view controllers. But UI view controllers can only do UI view controller things. And we created a color detail view controller that has a color property on it, and it also has this IV outlet and some other code that we're going to write. And so we need our view controller not to be acting just like a UI view controller. It needs to act like a color detail view controller. So I'm going to copy that, go back to my colors view controller, and realize that to use my destination to set a color on it, I need to cast this for what it is, which is a color detail view controller. And I can do that by saying as question mark color detail view controller. Now the thing is, if it is a color detail view controller, it will be cast as that type, and destination will be a color detail view controller. But the question mark after as says, well, if I can't cast this as a color detail view controller, then the result is going to be nil. That is, it's going to be an optional set to nil. So I only want to proceed if the destination can be cast as a color detail view controller. So I can say if let destination equals segue.destination as a color detail view controller. So only if this succeeds, can be cast, and can be unwrapped. That's what the if let does for us. So this piece right here results in an optional that's either nil or a color detail view controller type. And it will, if it's not nil, get unwrapped into destination as that type, and if let will be true, and then I can do whatever I want with this as a color detail view controller. So I can say here destination dot color equal, and now I need to specify the color that the user selected by tapping on a cell. And it is the table view object that knows what cell was selected. So it is from the table view that we will get the selected cell. So I'll put here table view dot, well, do I have access to the table view? At the current time, I don't have access to the table view. In these functions, table view number rows and section, and table view self-erode index path, we're being passed a table view into the function, and that's why we have access to the table view here. But here I don't have access to the table view because of not being passed it on the prepare, and I don't have currently an IB outlet to the table view. So the next thing I'm going to do is create an IB outlet to the table view. So I'm going to the storyboard. I'm going to my colors view controller and selecting the assistant editor. And then I'm going here to automatic. If you don't automatically see the view controller you're looking for, remember you need to go up here and select automatic, or you need to go to manual and manually navigate to the particular view controller. In this case, say colors, not the interface, but colors view controller, the class. So these are all listing here as interfaces, so I'm going to go to automatic, and that gives us colors view controller Swift. So I need to create an IB outlet from the table view so that I have access to it. So I'm going to control click drag from table view into here. I'm going to do it right above view did load, and I'm going to create an outlet, and I'm going to call this colors table view. And I'm going to add a space after that. So I'm going to leave the assistant editor and go back to the colors view controller, and now I have here an IB outlet to the table view that's called colors table view. So down here in prepare, I can use colors table view, and then hit dot, and I want to find the property that tells me the row that was selected by the user. So I'm going to scroll down until I see something that pops out like SE selection index. Nope. Maybe it's under I for index, path for selected row. There we go. Now an index path is like the index path we used in self-erode index path. An index path is going to tell us the section and then the row in the section. Section and row are both properties of index path for the selected row. Index path for selected row. So that's my index path. And then I need to get the particular row out of it. So that's going to tell me what row. So this is the row of the cell in the table that was selected. Now that's not my color. My colors are contained in the colors array. So I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to get my color out of the colors array, and the particular item that I want is the index path for selected rows row out of the colors table view. Now we have an error because index path is an optional type. And I don't want to force unwrap it. I'd like to be safe about this. I might be able to fix this by saying, oh, well, let's treat this as a optional chain. This is optional chaining. But then we got another problem. This is a value that is being used to index into an array, and it needs to be an actual number. So it's an optional and it needs to be an actual number. What could I do? Well, I could put it up here in my if let. My if let is going to contain things that I want to unwrap. So I could put here, I come up and put a comma after the if let on the destination, comma. I could say that I want to also say let row equal, and then I'm going to put this here. Let's see what this means. Colors table view again is our table view. Index path for selected row is the index path for the selected row, but it's an optional. If this is nil, that is, there is no index path for selected row, then .row is not going to be called on it, and we're not going to be able to unwrap it, and this if let will fail, which is a reasonable thing. If we don't have a valid row, we can't get the color that we want. On the other hand, if index path for selected row, the optional, has a value, it will be unwrapped, .row will be called on it, and because this is an optional, this row that's resulting from this will be an optional. And so if we're able to get a row, we'll unwrap it into row and we'll have access to it here. So we could say we want the row out of the colors. So to summarize, we are setting the color on the destination view controller because we know what row was selected by the user from the table view, and we're using that row to index into our array of colors. The destination and the row both are coming from things that are optional, so we're putting them in an if let to unwrap them before we use them. If we're able to unwrap destination, we're able to unwrap row, then we're able to use destination and row to access the destination view controller and then use the row to tell it which color we want. So if I run this now, and we select orange, we'll transition to the detail view controller for the color, and orange is displayed. We go back to colors and we can select purple, and we're transitioning to purple and we go back. So that is giving us the ability to segue to a destination view controller, to tell the destination view controller what item the user selected from the menu, from the table view, and because it's in a navigation controller, it gives us the navigation ability we need to move between the color view controller and the color detail view controller. There are 3 more things I'd like to accomplish before I finish this project. I'd like to make the background color of the view in the detail view controller the color that is being displayed. I'd like to display the name of the color as the title at the top. And you'll notice that when I select a color and return, that it's shown as gray, because this gray color is used to indicate that the cell is selected. So I would like to deselect this cell so that it is the color that it originally was. So the first thing that I'd like to do is make the background color the same as the name of the color here. So we're going to the detail view controller, and below where we set the text on the color name label to the name of the color, I would like to add a line of code to set the background color of the view controller that we're in, which is the color detail view controller. Self represents the view controller. The view controller has a reference to the view that it contains, so we'll go to view, and the view has a property called background color, which is the same as the background property on the view of a table view cell. And we're going to set that equal to color question mark dot UI color. So this will set the background color of the view to a particular UI color. And color is an optional, so we're using optional chaining. If this succeeds in unwrapping, then we're going to call UI color and set it on the background color. And if it fails, this will result in a nil. And because background color is a UI color optional, it's okay that it is being set to nil. So color question mark UI color, this optional chaining will either result in a nil or it will result in a color. In either case, it's fine because background color is an optional. If we run this, then instead of the dark background or the white background color, we're going to have it being set to the color that we selected. The other thing is I'd like the name of the color to be the title in the detail view controller. So I can say self.title, and it's going to be equal to the color name. And remember, color question mark name gives us an optional, which means title here has to be a string optional, which it is. So if we run it again, and we select a color, yellow is displayed in the middle, it's displayed as the title, and we have the color in the background. Now we still have the problem that the table view cell that was last selected is showing as selected, so we need to make a modification to the code in the colors view controller where we're managing what the table does, and do something to deselect the cell after it's been selected. I can write a function that gets called when a table view cell is selected, and then I can use the selected cell to set the cell so that it is not in a selected state, and that'll make the gray bar disappear. So I'm going to write another table view function called didSelectRow at index path. This function gets called when a row is selected, and I am able to determine the row by using the index path and getting the selected row from the table view using the index path. So I'm going to type table view dot and then cell for row at, and then I'm going to hand it the index path. So what I have is the selected cell, and cell for row at index path is returns an optional, so I'm going to use optional chaining to continue if we're able to unwrap the cell and not continue if we're not able to unwrap the cell. So the optional chaining, if we are unable to get the cell for the row based on the index path and unwrap it, then we want to take that cell and we want to set it so that the cell is not selected. So there is a Boolean state is selected, and we can set that equal to false. And that means when the cell is selected, when a row is selected and we have the cell, it's going to be in an unselected state after this function is called. So if I run this again, and I select yellow, you'll see it momentarily turned gray. We transitioned using the segue, and when we go back though, because it was deselected, is selected set to false, we don't see the gray bar over the yellow. Do this again with green, go back, green is not selected. We have one other way we could do this. Instead of detecting that the cell was selected and then setting its selected state to false, I could get rid of this function, and when I originally create the cell, I could say cell, and I could set its selection style to none, so that it never gives any visual indication that it was selected. So if I run this again, and select yellow and go back. We don't get the gray bar. In fact, we never see that momentary transition to gray like we did in the last version of it, because we are saying the selection style is none, so there is no indication of selection.